All right, we're going to call this Finance Committee meeting to order. Present are council members Frazier, Cost, Bub, Blake, and Marmee. First item on the agenda is a request for appropriation in the amount of $175.
Good evening. This is one of those instances where one of our offenders cut off their scrap and they've reimbursed us, and we would like to appropriate the money to spend it.
Motion. Second. Motion by Bub, second by Frazier. Any questions and/or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. The motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is a request for appropriation in the amount of $65,000.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is going to buy This is for the street department, and we're going to buy a smaller dump truck with a plow, and we're going to put a spinner on the back of it. This will help us clear streets, the side streets a little better, and the small areas that we can't get the bigger trucks into. And we're taking this out of the street department fund. It's not money we're asking for anywhere else. We're able to figure we got enough money within the budget to do it.
Second. Motion by Cost, second by Frazier. Questions and/or discussion?
I have a question.
Mr. Frazier.
So one dump truck and then one regular truck?
No, it's one dump truck. We're going to buy a bed in a bed for another truck, and we're going to buy a spinner, or AKA Dickie John is what we call him,
Okay.
that throws the salt and measures it.
Any further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. The motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is a request for legislation authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to apply for funding for the United States Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance under the Bulletproof Vest Partnership Grant Program.
This is a 50-50 grant. We currently need 8 vests for the police department, and that's about it. The award's typically made in the fall. Sorry.
I have a motion by Bub. Second by Cost. Questions and/or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. That motion passes 5-0. Thank you. And the last item on the agenda is a request for appropriation in the amount of $45,000.
This is to buy 2 used vehicles for property maintenance. We have a third member now. Also, the trucks are just old. So currently, the new member is driving Joe's truck, and Joe is driving his personal vehicle. So,
Motion.
Second. A motion by Frazier, second by Cost. Any questions and/or discussion?
I have one.
Yes, Mr. Frazier.
So currently we have 2 trucks. Is that what our current situation is? So are we going to retire 1, keep 3, or what's the inventory look like?
that's the plan for now. Until we can get a third truck. Both the trucks are tired, but
Yeah. One's worse than the other?
yes, sir.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. That motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, this Finance Committee meeting stands adjourned. Next up is Service.
I'd like to bring this Service Committee meeting to order.
I'm sending for Brad.
Okay.
Oh, he's here.
There he is.
He's here? Okay. We'll put the Service Committee meeting on hold for a minute. Shift. Sorry about that. No problem. You started anything? Just brought to order. All right. The timing is perfect. All right, since the service committee meeting has already been called to order, I'll say that those present are myself, Rath, Cost, Bub, Blake, and Lang. Up first, consider resolution number 19-18, authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service of the City of Newark, Ohio, to advertise for bids and enter into contracts subject to the appropriation of funds for providing the necessary labor, materials, and equipment for painting the water storage tank in the Stonewall Estate area.
Yeah, this is just
Mr. Loomis.
authorization. This is just authorization to paint the water tower or the water standpipe on the west end. We do this about every 10 to 12 years, and it's been almost 11 years now, and so we're going to try to do it this summer. We will be hiring a inspection consultant, somebody to do the inspection, because they measure the thickness of the paint and all those kind of things for us as we do this. So and we couldn't find anybody to stand at the top of the water tower and do that. So but anyway, that's all it is. It's just to paint the water tower. So.
All right.
Motion.
Motion by Bub,
Second.
seconded by Lang. Where exactly is this?
It's the standpipe on Morgan Manor, basically at the end of Tower Court off of Londondale, the white tower that sticks up at the west end.
Any questions, like Mr. Lang?
Mr. Loomis, could you just walk us through the timeline for sending out to bid and when you think it'll be completed?
Trying to get it completed by the end of the summer. There's not any really design work for this. There is some, we have to do some work with this. There's some piping that has to get done, but nothing that would take more than the painting will actually take probably at most 10 days. And they have to wait for a day that's not windy and all those kind of things, because we don't want to paint a bunch of houses while we're up there either. So,
Thank you.
yeah, but sometime by the end of summer it should be done. So.
Any other questions from the committee? Questions from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. That will be passed on to council. Thank you. Up next, resolution 19-21, authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service to advertise for bids and enter into contracts subject to the appropriation of funds for various construction projects. Mr. Moorhead, you have the floor.
Yes, sir. Thank you. This is the legislation that I bring to you every spring with sort of our list of projects that we have on tap that we anticipate going out to bid on. I can run through them quickly. Cedar Hill Cemetery, fence replacement, concrete repairs. This would replace the fencing from the top of the hill, basically about across from Arlington Avenue down to Manning Street. Second projects are the 2018 Newark Collector Street resurfacing. This is a project, resurfacing project we applied for OPWC State Capital Improvement Program funds for, and we were awarded those last fall, so we wish to move forward with the bidding on that. That list of streets is available. The next one is our 2019 street maintenance projects. I was scrambling, worked about 6 hours yesterday trying to get that complete, but unfortunately I do not have that complete. That list of streets will be available. I'm going to have it done by the end of the week though, so we want to get that one out to bid. That'll use our capital improvement funds and some license plate permissive tax funds for that project. The fourth one is our annual concrete maintenance project, which is replacing ADA curb ramps on some of those streets that we'll be paving. So that's funded through our community development department. Fifth one is signal upgrade at West Main Street and Terrace, and also at Granville Street and North 11th Street. So at Granville and North 11th, we'd be reconstructing that signal, bringing it up to current standards. And then at West Main and Terrace would be a totally new traffic signal out there. With the growth and development that's happened out there, the signal is deemed to be warranted at this point. So, and then the last project is, or no, not quite the last. The sixth project is our East Church Street streetscape and alley improvements. That'll be the block of East Church between 2nd and 3rd Street, and there'll be sidewalk replacement and lighting upgrade happening there. And then the last project is a Sleepy Hollow ditch improvement. This is a project that we are anticipating being funded through the Ohio Public Works Commission, and it's in conjunction with Newark Township. That is a ditch that runs west off of Horns Hill Road between Donovan Drive and Randy Drive up in the north end of town. The current ditch is not adequate to carry the flow that goes through it, so consequently houses on both the city side and the township side experience a lot of flooding issues up through there. So we think we can design a better solution for that. So any questions on any of those, I'd be glad to try to answer.
Brian, the OPWC grant, how much was that for?
For the resurfacing project?
Yes.
$250,000.
And you'll have a list of streets by the end of the week. Could I ask you to please provide us with that list
I will do that.
at your earliest convenience? I'd appreciate that. Any other questions from the committee?
I'll offer a motion.
Motion by Bub,
Second.
seconded by Lang.
Just a quick clarification.
Yes, Mr. Frazier? I mean, Mr. Lang.
Funny. Mr. Moorhead, just wanted to clarify. So there's a list for the OPWC, the resurfacing project, and then there's also a list for the 2019 street maintenance projects. Those two items are separate, right?
Correct.
And you have which one you said the OPWC list is done?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll have both of those.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll send both of them out. We're going to include them both in the same project, but due to the funding sources, I've got to kind of keep them separate.
Okay.
One consolidated list, I think, would be ample.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing this on to council for a full vote signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. That'll move forward with a vote of 5-0. Up next, resolution number 19-22, authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service to advertise for bids and enter into contract for certain essential supplies for various departments of the city of Newark, Ohio for 2019, 2020, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Moorhead?
Yes, this is, again, a piece of legislation that we do annually. I'm a little behind here, kind of missed the boat on this one in January, so we're trying to recover here and recover some time. That's why we're asking for it to be passed as emergency. But this will be chemicals for the water plant, and then our paving materials, asphalt and asphalt emulsions, and cold patch material for the street department.
Okay. Any questions from the committee?
Offer a motion.
Motion by Bub. Seconded by Cost. Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing this on to full council for a vote signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That'll pass 5-0. Up next, resolution number 19-23, authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to prepare and submit applications to the Ohio Department of Transportation for the 2019 Transportation Alternative Program to partially fund one future project. Mr. Moorhead, you still have the floor.
Yes, thank you. This is a project that ODOT is planning to replace the bridge on West Main Street over top of Route 79 in the coming 3 years, I believe. And rather than just replacing it with a standard looking bridge as it is now, this Transportation Alternatives Program allows us to apply for additional funding that can be used for more decorative elements, form liner work on the bridge, some decorative fencing, upgrading the lighting if possible. So we submitted a letter of interest to the program, and they came back to us and said that we are approved for a letter of interest. The next step is to apply to the program now. And so we're asking for a $3,000 grant application that would be used towards that project. And this is funded by ODOT. The project would be administered and managed by ODOT, so it's basically just to pay for the upgrades to the project. So we're asking for your approval of legislation.
Awesome. What's the odds of, I know it's a guess, so I'm not holding you to it, but what's the odds of getting that?
It's a statewide competition, basically. The fact that this is our second try at this particular project. I think we've got a reasonable, probably better than 50% chance of at least getting partially funded for this. So.
Motion by Bub,
Second.
seconded by Lang. Any questions from the committee? Questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am, please come to the podium, state your name and address, please, for the record.
Hi, I'm Janet Green, 1791 Olympic Court in Newark.
Ms. Green,
How are you?
long time no see.
Yeah. It's not dark anymore, so we can come out at night again. I wondered if this bridge has a pedestrian component to it.
Okay. You want to have a seat? I'll let Mr. Moorhead answer that question.
Yeah, it does have walkways on the bridge.
Okay, thank you.
Currently does, yeah. And those would be on any replacement project also.
Any further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing this on the council for a full vote, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. That'll pass 5-0. Up next, resolution number 19-07, amending resolution number 81-09 and expanding the boundaries of the community reinvestment area number 1.
That's not us.
That's economic development. I apologize. I'm just kind of turning pages and reading. So that concludes the service department, the service department. The service committee. Up next will be economic development, and you'll hear about what I just read. Thank you.
All right, we'll call this Economic Development Committee to order. Those present are Frazier, Rath, Costling, and Blake sitting in for Hall. We have resolution number 1907, amending resolution number 8109, and expanding the boundaries of community reinvestment area number 1. This has been an ongoing discussion that we've had about the expansion of the CRA, and this is the committee that kind of brings together the recommendations from other council members as well as the administration for us to hopefully move this issue on full council. So, Director Motter, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned, we had brought this resolution forward, we being the administration, in collaboration with Councilman Labutus, yourself, Councilman Frazier, and Councilman Blake. A CRA is a tax abatement area, and on the map you'll see the light green or lime color area. That there represents the existing community reinvestment area number 1, and the brownish tan areas are the areas that we have considered to expand that CRA number 1 in order to take advantage of some of those tax abatements for future investors. It's probably difficult for those of you in the audience to see, but probably 90-some% of that tan area actually has some hashed lines going through it. Those hashed lines are areas that Councilman Frazier and Councilman Blake asked us to give additional consideration to. We had a previous map that didn't have all these areas in it, and they had asked us to be more inclusive, and so we did so. There are 2 other areas on the map that are not hashed, that represent what the administration would still like to include into this area. Those areas, first would be in the far left bottom corner. There's kind of a triangular piece. It's bordered on the bottom by a dark black line that actually represents the railroad that we're all are familiar with going through town. And that's also where the existing National Guard Armory is located. It's actually property owned by the state of Ohio. And we felt that that was a very critical piece to include in this legislation because it is on a railroad, which offers very good opportunities for future growth and development. that we're sorely lacking right now in the city of Newark, so we definitely wanted to include that. The other area would be on the bottom right-hand corner. You'll see a piece that almost looks like it's separated. The separation is actually the South Fork of the Licking River. And that is Route 13, or National Drive, that's coming right through that additional piece below the river. And because it is on a state route, again, the administration felt that it was critical to include that in this tax abatement area, because it would be prime ground, to develop as well. But it is a distressed area, and we felt it could use the assistance of a tax abatement. So we would like to see that included as well. So that's
And then one more piece.
well, yeah, it's hard. There's another area, if you're familiar with North Williams, North Fulton, and Bowers Avenue. It's just to the west of Route 79, and to the north of West Main Street. And that's another piece that Councilman Frazier.
I was talking about the Fleet Avenue piece.
Oh, and the
That's part of
Fleet
your
Avenue
update.
piece. So I'll finish. So to include that, and then Fleet Avenue, basically that runs east of South 2nd Street. That neighborhood in through there is included as well. Again, the Councilman Blake's request, because we are working on a neighborhood revitalization program. And it would be another tool in our toolbox to help stimulate revitalization in that South End neighborhood.
So the number one goal I had for this legislation was to provide some equality between the boundaries and distressed areas, because the focus is distressed residential, industrial, and commercial property, tax incentives for property tax investments in order to encourage future development. And so when I look on the map, I feel like the river is an adequate cutoff for the south end of Newark. So we would include the administration piece for Fleet Avenue in the west end of Newark and make an even cut on the river, because I feel if we go further down on the south end of 13, you would see neighborhoods that would have partial CRA incentives in other neighborhoods that are on the same street that would not have the same tax incentive. And so for what the goal of our current structure of this is to expand the redevelopment outside of downtown to the west and the south in order to encourage development of both business and residential areas. And so the motion that I'm proposing is to accept the administration proposal with the removal of the South 13 parcel numbers, so that basically you would, the amendment would be for everything excluding this portion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
So explain to me again why you're removing that section.
So, as there are parcels that are entitled on 13 that are impacting these streets as well, that are right here. So we would be giving tax incentives to these streets without the due consideration for the rest of the neighborhoods. With the clean cut along the river, those full neighborhoods are being considered, and then we wouldn't have undue favoritism to streets just on 13 on the corridor.
So what about the two sections on the east and far west?
These would be accepted. So the only removal is this portion here.
And, can I continue?
Yes,
Okay. And Mr. Mauder, I'd like to understand that, excuse me, this tax abatement would be available for commercial development only.
Available for residential, commercial, industrial, and historical.
Commercial as well? Or I mean residential as well?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And these are not grandfathered in. There's an application process and oversight that's required in conjunction with this as well, correct? Not everybody in the area automatically gets it. There's an application process that's required.
That is, yes, everybody submits an application, correct.
So running north on 13, are we going to, so I see there's a number 4 boundary.
Yes, the gray area. That's an existing CRA.
Okay.
So
That's an existing?
Yes.
Okay. So do we have plans in the future to include north end of the town as well? and maybe future development?
So there is some limitation, and Director Motter can speak to that, about the number of times that we can expand based on 1994 rules and post-1994 rules. And so would you mind elaborating on that?
Well, I think number one, it's just more designed for distressed areas that aren't incentivized for investment. That's the whole idea, to have the tax abatement. So that's number one. And then what Mark was referring to is after July of 1994, you can only expand twice in a community reinvestment area without going into a whole other set of rules that are much more cumbersome. It requires school board input, it requires city council input, and so on. So there's some advantages to taking advantage of the CRA before it meets those requirements.
So I'm confused as to why you would have gone a block east and west on 15 to include those whole neighborhoods.
I guess because primarily the Route 13 is a state route, and there's properties along there, such as Roy's Automotive has a number of properties in through there. The Moose Lodge is there. Some other parcels that could be potentially ripe for investment and new development. And we just saw it as a gateway to the city and thought that would be a good place to have incentives as well.
Any other discussions from the members of the committee?
Mr. Chairman, just a point of order.
Yes, sir.
You cannot amend this legislation at committee. It's already on the agenda of council, and if you want to make an amendment, you need to do that on the floor of council.
So I think it's an issue with parliamentary procedure, right?
Correct.
So there was some confusion on moving this back to committee. So right now, is this legislation considered tabled? Is that how it would be considered?
No, it was referred back to committee. Those are separate and distinct procedures. It was referred back to committee, but there had already been a motion to adopt at council, which means only council at this point can modify it by amendment. So you can discuss it, end your discussion, and then when at a future meeting of full city council, somebody can ask that matter be brought back before council for consideration, at which point in time the amendment can be made then.
So there is no need for a motion in committee to reconsider. The motion has to be done on the council floor.
To amend?
To amend.
It has to be done on council floor.
Yep.
So we could do that tonight if we wanted to.
If somebody brings it off the table and puts it on the agenda tonight, yes.
Thank you, sir. Thanks. So there is, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, so we have two pieces of legislation before us, right? 1907 and 1907A.
So there's an administrative legislation piece, and if you look at that, it would be that full legislation except for the last page, which it says the following parcel numbers along 13. So that's the only part that my recommendation is to remove.
Now, was there some discussion about percentages, and you had once mentioned about
the economic piece
Yes.
of it? Director Motter and Doug Marmee discussed that. In our first follow-up, Director Motter provided some numbers about the effectiveness of the CRA. Is that what the question is tied to?
Yeah, I thought you had mentioned when you were going to change or recommend some possible suggestions on the percentages of which.
So we did some research as far as what are the 1994 rules versus what are the post-1994 rules. The pre-1994 rules, according to the Ohio Department of Development, must be at 100%.
Okay.
So I originally was thinking that we could reduce that, but based on conversations with the director, law director, in the Ohio Department of Development, that's not possible.
So this purely is just changing boundary lines.
Yep.
It isn't changing any other.
Maintaining 100%
Okay.
of an increased property value. Any other? Yeah.
I'll just speak. Director Motter, I want to thank you. I know we've been working together on this neighborhood revitalization committee, and thank you for bringing this to our attention. First Councilman Labutus, then I jumped on board, and then Mr. Frazier. So it's kind of been a snowball, but I appreciate you working with the various different entities here to come to this conclusion. I guess I hope that I guess we're going to wait till council to bring it up, but I would be in favor of what you're recommending. And we're talking about the south gate entryway of the city. And if we're able to include those pieces, because we also have, there's a little carry out up there. There's an old gas station that used to be up there, and so there are some opportunities to change things along South 13. And so if it is in this zone, then I think we can have some possibilities, and that is just the southern gateway as someone comes from 13. We also got to keep in mind that 13 is going to be torn up from the downtown all the way to National Drive here shortly. So it's going to have some new streetscape and whatnot going on there. So if we could continue the possibilities going on to the city limit, I think that's a good move. So thank you for bringing that forward.
You're welcome. Those are our thoughts as well. So I appreciate you speaking to that.
Yeah, and my whole thought is a clean boundary, right? And making sure that we don't impact neighbors across the street from each other, where why isn't my property included and why is the property right next to me included? And so the thought of just carving it out on the river kind of sets that designation as a clean line to say this is a separate neighborhood, everybody in this neighborhood gets a CRA, and we don't go through the parcel route that says these individual parcels are considered, the parcel right next door to us is not considered. And so that's the reason for the recommendation. We will see how council goes tonight. I do plan on bringing this off of the table and voting on it in order to close it out and move on with the opportunity to businesses, residential areas, and commerce. So, any other questions, comments, or concerns?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I would certainly agree. I think as I've looked at the legislation, as I've looked at some of the requirements, the main concern I've had, as we've talked about, is the borders and how we select the borders and how we go about not just expanding to the whole city. I think I'd probably be in favor of expanding that to cover a broader area rather than removing it entirely. But I think at some point we have to find some kind of natural border that we can, if we're ever pressed on this, be able to defend either to the public or to the state if it came to that. So I share Mr. Frazier's concerns as far as going parcel by parcel along 13, though I understand why you would go that route.
If I may comment?
Yes, sir.
Again, that parcel we're discussing along Route 13 from the river to the Heath-Newark border, it's on a state route. So to me, that's a little bit different than a neighborhood. You'll also notice that railroad cuts right through all those other existing CRA areas and some of the areas we're adding as well does Route 79 and Route 13. So I think we have a number of precedents that are already in effect that I think would lend itself well to the example that we're trying to add right there along National Drive from the river south to Heath. So just a little more input on that. I don't think we're being exclusive of neighborhoods. I think we're being inclusive of a state route that would be an area that especially commercial and maybe industrial development would take place. And again, those are two items that we really need in the city of Newark. So if I could leave that last comment with you.
Any other comments from the committee?
Just a question. So the only difference between the two proposals is the section on the southeast.
So the difference between my amendment and the administration amendments is the piece on the west, the Fleet Avenue piece, and the South 13 piece. So hearing the arguments for the western portion and the eastern portion, I can accept the Fleet Avenue and the National Guard piece. So what I was going to do was remove the South 13 piece, vote on this with everything except for the South 13 parcel by parcel component. Any other questions, comments from members of the committee? From members of the audience? Yes, sir. Can we get a name and address as well?
Sure. David Green, 1791 Olympic Court, Newark. I wanted to raise a question which I'm sure you've talked about and I'm sure I'll get reassurances about, but is the question of tax abatement. And the question of, I assume, or I'm guessing clearly, maybe that tax abatement means encouragement to investment, so they see an opportunity to reduce their taxes. And the question I have for you all is how this affects the residents who live nearby and the communities, how it actually affects them, not how it draws investment. I mean, we have the example of Google in New Albany recently, which got a 15-year total tax abatement. And as well as that, it got $250,000 to pay for permits that enabled it to locate there. My question is, and you were talking about expanding an area that already provides some tax abatements. How these things are negotiated and what role the community has in those negotiations in terms of seeing that they actually benefit. Not just that we're in a competition with every other small town and every community in the United States to get companies to come here rather than somewhere else. And so it becomes a competition where you give away tax money for the future that could benefit the neighborhoods otherwise. And I'm talking about the conditions of bargaining here, but I'm also saying where the residents fit in this picture. And I know I'll get assurances that there'll be jobs. I think the Google operation in New Albany said 35 jobs for sure, 15 years tax abatement for 35 jobs, and questionably maybe 50. I think that's what the news coverage said about that.
And so there's multiple parts to your question, right?
Right.
The first part is the residential aspect. So it being open to residential members of the community to receive the benefit, not just commercial and industrial purposes, ensures that whole neighborhoods can be revitalized and leverage this. The other part is there's a submission and review process with the Department of Development that I'll have Mark speak to that makes sure that it's equitable both for those applying, the neighborhoods, and the community in whole. And so the goal is not to give blind incentives out. The goal is to offer residents as well as commerce the opportunity to invest in our community. And Mark, as far as that process, what would that process typically
Well, I think the first comparison I'd like to make, David, is the Google you're talking about is over there in New Albany, and Amazon is over there as well, and Facebook, and those are vacant pieces of land that are very much prime for development. CRAs are in place to help distressed areas, to help a city raise itself up by encouraging people to want to invest in their properties, and as a result of that, realize a 10 to 15 years if it's a new construction, 12 years typically if it's a rehab. So we're not talking major dollars that are going to be abated, and the school systems, for example, are going to miss out on. I did a report because Councilman Marmee asked me for some metrics of how this worked out, and it's in amongst all these papers here, but it was a very favorable return on investment for these community reinvestment area tax abatements. If I remember my own numbers, it's like a 53% return on investment because of what people are putting in. So again, totally different comparison when you're trying to lure a big company like Amazon in to where we're trying to take advantage of the properties that Newark has. And we are limited. We're landlocked to the south. We're landlocked to the west. We have a river to our northeast. So a lot of what Newark has to work with is infill and also taking care of what we already have. I think that's very important, and that's what this sort of tax abatement is geared toward. And it has proven out to be a very favorable return on investment for our community. And I'd be glad to share those facts with you. It's been a fair amount of time, to be quite honest with you, because we hadn't really done that analysis. So I thank Mr. Marmee for putting me through the homework assignment and digging into it. And it was very favorable for what the outcome was. So hopefully that helps answer your question as well.
Any other questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman, Director Motter, if we have a senior citizen who owns their home in this area and they want to make some improvements on their new siding or a new roof or something like that, how would this assist that individual?
So the important thing to remember is the numbers of this. So for example, if somebody paid $80,000 for a property and they decided they want to do new windows and doors and roofing and siding, and let's say they put under $50,000 into their property. So they now have $130,000 invested. Where the tax abatement comes in is it will keep the property being assessed at the current property value of $80,000 valuation, and then whatever the county auditor's office determines the increased value, assessed property value for taxation is, that's the amount that'll be abated. So just because they put $50,000 in it, it may or may not be that full $50,000. It all depends on what the county auditor's office is. But and then whatever that increased property valuation is, that's the amount that be abated over the 12 or 15 years. So that's how that'll be the advantage to the property owner.
So we're allowing that property owner then to increase their property, and hopefully we'll have a ripple effect throughout the neighborhood to have other residential owners to do the
Exactly.
same.
Yeah. And as you're so familiar, Jeremy, being on that Newark Neighborhood Revitalization Committee, we're trying to put as many tools in the toolbox that we have to help really make an impact, not only on the south end, but develop that model using the south end, and then we'll carry that out throughout the eastern part of the city and just north of the city and west of the city, wherever the neighborhoods need some help. And that's going to be, I think, an important incentive for, let's face it, your home is still one of your largest investments that any of us will ever have. And I think it's important that we encourage people to take care of that. And the numbers did prove that out, that it's had substantial impact on the neighborhoods, both residentially and commercially.
Mr. Rath? Do you have an item? Okay.
Sure.
Mr. Costa?
Mark, so in that time period, you talked about the 80,000, the 50,000, and did you say 12 years?
For rehab, yes. Mm-hmm.
Then what happens when that property sells within that time period? What does that do to
The abatement? It stays with the property. It follows the property, not the property owner.
So the next owner would still get the rest of that
Correct.
time period as well then?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Any other questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am. You have to come back up and say your name and address, even though we know it.
Janet Green, 1791 Olympic Court. So in terms of the relationship between owner-occupied dwellings and rental properties, because I know we've had a shift over the last 10 years in the numbers of property that are owner-occupied. So we're moving toward a larger percentage in Newark of rental properties. How will that, have you thought about this? Have you thought about what it would mean for the development of this area in terms of the difference between a senior citizen who wants to have new siding and somebody who's a big developer and wants to come in and just tear everything down and build higher income housing?
Yeah, and I would let the director speak to that. I think that the best check that we have is a submission and application review process in order to make sure that everything is above board for what is the neighborhood impact and what is the process and the goals of the development. But Director, do you have anything just to speak to that on?
Well, before he does that, I want to ask a part two to this question, which is, does the city have a plan to deal with making sure that there is affordable housing in Newark for our residents? Okay.
I guess the first part of your question, there's always going to be a free market. We live in a free market society, supply and demand and so forth. So, again, one of the goals is to raise the value of property. That's why this is in place. I can't speak to the future is going to hold exactly. So it's kind of an open-ended question, I guess, for me to try to answer.
And the other side of that too is the existing zoning that's in place, as well as the check with the submission and application process, as well as a lot of these items would have to go in front of a planning commission to allow for public input. So
that's a great point.
It's not a one-stop shop of, hey, we're going to go build an apartment complex and get tax credits. There's going to be an open and public process before any of that would occur.
Mr. Chairman, can I also add that a large part of this neighborhood's in the floodplain as well? So you're looking at, if you're going to have some serious investment, they're going to have to consider that floodplain as well until we raise that levy.
Yes, sir. Come up and name and address, please.
Chris Wills, 161D South 6th Street. I have a question about our homeless that are living on the side of the banks on this property. Are you, since you are willing to remodel homes, are you going to take them in and help them get housing as you're pushing them off of the property to where they are sleeping?
That's a little off topic for what we're talking about. We're going to have a 7 o'clock council meeting where it's open for miscellaneous comments. When it comes to what this portion does, it's for property owners' tax credit incentives. So if property owners, I mean,
Not the money, not the people.
that's not what I said.
That's what you said.
That's not what I said. Is there any other comments or questions from the audience or committee?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of back where I left off too. If someone bought the property, wanted to tear down a house, build a brand new house, then what, same situation as
Yes.
opposed to remodeling an existing home?
Yes.
As
So if they
long-
bought the property for
as long as it's got the
$50,000,
zoning, or you could still take advantage of the same.
right. I guess maybe one last comment on this is, it is a tax abatement, but we're not losing on taxes because it's still going to be taxed at the original value that was. We're just debating for a couple of years, which over the lifespan of a house or a piece of property, 12 years is not much. So that's what we're asking to allow people to do, property owners to do, to encourage further development and upgrade our neighborhoods. So again, the tax basis that they bought the property, that's going to stay the same. We still can keep collecting taxes on that. And that's important to remember as well.
Any other questions from the committee? Any other questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Beth Blind, 33 Summit Street. I live in the South End as well, and I'd like to encourage you to include this portion because for me the key word is opportunity. Many people look for opportunities to improve their homes, and I've been one of them over the years, and that's just a wonderful thing. To be able to write something off while making improvements. And again, being a resident of the South End, that's a very true statement that he made about the Gateway, because there are some folks that are really trying to make improvements, but as we all know, sometimes that's difficult. So this really would be an incentive for them. So just to encourage your vote.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Caroline Cook, 898 Lake Glow Court, Newark, Ohio. Are there any incentives for homeowners who may be lower income, like low-cost loans, HUD programs to help them to get opportunities to improve their properties?
Director Monner, I'd have you come up and speak to that, but absolutely right.
Just briefly, because it's off topic, but the answer is yes, but using our community development block grant funds, but it's all income qualified. So if someone is qualified, the answer is yes.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? All right, with that, we'll stand adjourned until 7. We can reconsider this matter on council floor, and with that, we'll be adjourned. Thank you, everybody.